Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the American Ozarks. Before we start, please let me know where you're watching from and what time it is when you listen to this narration. We want to know what places these written accounts reach and when they do. The year was 1895, and the Ozark Mountains in Missouri and Arkansas were still mostly wild and unexplored. The thick woods hid steep limestone cliffs, winding cave systems, and remote valleys where people lived mostly unaffected by the Industrial Revolution that changed America's cities. In October, the hardwood forests were full of fall colors, and the first cold winds came down from the north. 5 men from Springfield, Missouri, went on what should have been a normal week-long hunting trip. They were well prepared and had a lot of experience in the outdoors, so they knew what to expect in the area. None would ever come back. The group included Thomas Blackwood, 42, who owned a hardware store; James Conley, 39, who was the town's doctor; William Hartley, 36, who ran the only bank in town; Robert Fleming, 33, who was a school teacher; and Charles Preston, 28, who was the youngest and worked as a telegraph operator. These were well-respected members of the community who were family men with stable lives and bright futures. People in Springfield were shocked when they went missing, and it would become one of the strangest mysteries in Ozark history. On the 12th of October, 1895, the men left by train for the small town of Winona in Shannon County, which is deep in the eastern Ozarks. From there, they hired a local guide to drive them in a wagon to their planned campsite near the headwaters of the Current River. Elijah Thornton, the guide, left them at their camp and said he would be back in 7 days. He came back on October 19th to find an empty campsite. This would be the site of one of the most disturbing investigations in the region's history. Not only did 5 men go missing without a trace, but the strange events that led to their disappearance and the troubling evidence that was found in later investigations make this case even more disturbing. The official record is still missing important documents that are mysteriously missing from county archives. Based on newspaper articles, personal journals, and interviews done in the years after the event, what follows is an attempt to put together what might have happened. Investigators found 5 bedrolls neatly arranged inside the tent at the deserted campsite. A pot was still hanging over the ashes of a fire that had been out for a long time. They carefully stacked their rifles against a tree. There were 5 sets of hunting gear, but the men's clothes were not included. There was no sign of a fight or a quick exit. It was like all 5 men had just walked away from camp and disappeared into the woods at the same time. The first search party saw a lot of strange things that official reports would later leave out. An article in the Springfield Republican on the 24th of October, 1895, said that the men's personal items were arranged in a very neat way. Samuel Winters, a reporter, wrote, "The 5 hunting knives had been placed in a perfect star pattern on a flat rock near the fire pit. The men's tobacco pouches were lined up by size. This careful arrangement suggests that the abandonment wasn't sudden but planned." Thornton quickly rode to the nearest settlement, the small logging town of Eminence, to tell people about the missing hunters. The sheriff of Shannon County put together a search party of 25 men who searched the nearby woods for almost 2 weeks. There was no sign of the men's whereabouts. No bodies, no blood trails, no personal items left behind, nothing. The search party's most experienced trackers were baffled by the lack of physical evidence. There were no footprints on the ground around the camp that led away from it, even though it had rained recently, which should have kept those marks. Hunters who knew the area well said that the forest was unusually quiet, with no bird calls or animal sounds that usually meant a natural predator was nearby. But no known predator in the Ozarks could have taken 5 armed men without leaving behind signs of a fight. A lot of newspapers at the time wrote about the strange disappearance. The Springfield Republican published daily updates on the search. The Street, Louis Post-Dispatch, sent a special reporter who wrote dramatic reports that speculated on what might happen, from bear attacks to gangs of criminals. As weeks went by with no news, people lost interest. By December 1895, the story was only mentioned here and there, and by early 1896, it looked like the case would never be solved. But this is where our real investigation starts. In 1952, while workers were fixing up the old Shannon County Courthouse, they found a sealed metal box inside a wall. Sheriff Martin Crawford, who had been in charge of the first investigation, owned the leather-bound journal that was in the box. The journal had never been part of the official record, and what it said about the 5 hunters from Springfield was very disturbing. There were strange things happening when Crawford's journal was found. According to records at the courthouse, the renovation work was needed because the east wall of the building had structural problems that had not been seen before. Lloyd Branson, the construction foreman, later told the Eminence Current River Press that the wall cavity where the box was found looked like it had been made on purpose when the courthouse was built in 1871, 24 years before the hunters went missing. The metal box had been hidden for decades, but there was no dust or rust on it. The first entry in Crawford's journal is from the 20th of October, 1895, the day after Thornton said the men were missing. The first few entries talk about normal search procedures, like getting volunteers together, setting up search grids, and talking to possible witnesses. But the tone of the entries changes a lot on October 25th. Crawford writes, "Found strange markings today 1/2 mile northwest of the campsite. Unlike anything I've seen before. Not animal tracks, not human footprints. The men refused to go near them. Something not right about this place." The journal describes the markings in clinical detail. Parallel lines, approximately 4 inches apart, pressed deep into the soil. Not all the time, but they show up and disappear at random times. As if whatever made them walked on the ground and written elsewhere, the lines end at the base of a limestone bluff, where there is no cave entrance or passage, but the tracks just stop there, as if they are still going through solid rock. The entry for the next day is even worse. "Thornton took me to a cave system that isn't on any maps. The locals say they stay away from it. Inside, we found an old lantern that Thornton said belonged to Dr. Conley. There were no other signs of the men. The cave goes deeper than our lights could reach. The air smells wrong, like metal and something else I can't name." Crawford put together a special team to explore the cave system. Only 3 men stepped up: John Reynolds, a miner who was used to working underground, Thomas Wilcox, a skilled hunter known for his ability to track animals, and Peter Hammond, the county surveyor who brought mapping tools. On October 27, they went into the dark. Crawford wrote in his journal that night, "Reynolds came back alone. The others are gone. Reynolds won't talk about what happened. His hair is completely white. I'm ending the search tomorrow. Whatever took those men is still down there." There is a rough copy of Crawford's attempt to interview Reynolds in the journal. Asked him what happened to Wilcox and Hammond. He stared at the wall for almost 5 minutes before answering. When he did, his voice was flat and emotionless. "They're still walking," he said, following it deeper. "I almost did too. Would have, if my lantern hadn't gone out in the dark. I couldn't see it anymore, so its pull weakened. I found the entrance again by touch alone." When asked what it was, Reynolds started to shake uncontrollably. He wouldn't say anything else. He writes, "They've agreed to seal all records of the cave. It will be removed from maps. The official report will state that the search yielded no results. This is for the best. Some truths should remain buried." The last thing Crawford wrote was on November 5. "Reynolds killed himself last night and left no note. I dream of the cave now. A voice is calling from the dark. I understand why he did it. The pull grows stronger each night. I've told my deputy to board up my bedroom window. I'm afraid of what I might do otherwise. There's a presence in my mind that wasn't there before. Something waiting, something patient." The journal ends abruptly. Sheriff Martin Crawford left his job in December 1895 because he was worried about his health, according to records. He moved to Colorado, where he died 3 years later of what was officially called nervous exhaustion. The doctor who saw Crawford wrote in a private letter that he had been sent to a sanitarium after trying to go east to Missouri several times for reasons he couldn't or wouldn't explain. In 1952, the discovery of Crawford's journal sparked a brief revival of interest in the case. Michael Harrison, a reporter for the Springfield News Leader, started looking into it. He found older people who remembered the event, like Thornton's daughter Martha, who was 15 at the time of the disappearance. Martha, who was now in her 70s, talked about troubling memories that had never been made public before. Martha said that her father was very upset by what he saw at the hunters' campsite. He didn't talk about it much, she told Harrison, but once when he'd had too much whiskey, he told me there had been a 6th bedroll in the tent and 6 sets of gear, but only 5 men had gone on that hunting trip. This news makes me think of some very troubling things. If a 6th person had come along on the hunt, who were they, and why was there never any mention of them in any official report? The train manifest from Springfield to Winona only had the names of the 5 known hunters. None of the men's families said they were traveling with anyone else. But Martha Thornton's story suggests that someone or something had joined their group without anyone noticing. Martha also said that her father had found something else at the campsite that wasn't mentioned in any official reports: the journal of Robert Fleming, the school teacher. Thornton had kept it a secret for all those years. Martha found it among his things after he died in 1919. She gave it to Harrison, who put some of the best parts in his unpublished manuscript. Fleming's journal entries are the only first-hand accounts of what the hunting party went through in their last days. The first few entries talk about normal camp life and hunting activities. On October 14th, Fleming writes, "Strange sounds in the forest last night. Not animal, not human. Blackwood thinks it might be wind in the caves. Conley disagrees. Whatever it is, it's keeping us awake." The entry continues. "Preston seems most affected by the sounds. He sits facing the forest for hours, listening. When asked what he hears, he says it's like a conversation just beyond comprehension, as if the sounds almost form words. Hartley suggested it might be water echoing through the cave systems known to honeycomb these mountains. That explanation satisfies most of us, though Conley remains skeptical." October 15th. "Preston insists someone is watching us from the tree line. We've seen no one, but game has become scarce. Hartley suggested moving camp, but Blackwood refuses. Says we're overreacting to normal forest sounds. The tension among us grows." At dinner, Conley and Blackwood had a heated argument about the purpose of our trip. Blackwood insisted we came solely for hunting, while Conley referenced the real reason without elaboration. The others grew uncomfortable and changed the subject. I'm beginning to wonder if I was told everything about this expedition before agreeing to join. This passage suggests the possibility that the hunting trip may have had an undisclosed purpose, at least in the minds of some participants. Historical records show that Dr. James Conley had already published a paper in a medical journal about strange cases of wilderness catalepsy he had seen in patients who went to the Ozarks' remote areas. The medical community at the time mostly ignored the paper, and Conley never wrote about the topic again. "Found strange footprints around the edge of our camp this morning. They were too narrow to be human and too structured to be animal. Conley drew pictures of them, but none of us can figure out what made them." Preston, who is getting more and more upset, says he saw someone or something standing among the trees last night, a tall figure, he says, but with strange proportions. Blackwood still doesn't believe us, but I notice he's kept his rifle closer today. The strange sounds keep getting louder every night. They seem to come from all directions at once, as if the forest itself were speaking. Fleming's description of the footprints matches similar reports from other events in the Ozark region. In 1887, a surveying team in nearby Oregon County wrote down that they found narrow, long impressions that were about 14 inches long and had only 3 toe-like projections at the front. The county got the team's report, but it was never made public. A hunter in Crawford County said in 1912 that he found similar tracks near the entrance to a cave system that had never been explored before. Local newspapers thought the story was interesting and suggested that the tracks might belong to a new type of mountain animal that hasn't been found yet. October 17th, Hartley discovered a cave entrance half a mile from camp, unexplored, not on any maps. Blackwood and Conley went to investigate while the rest of us continued hunting. They returned, visibly shaken. Conley's hands trembled so badly he could barely hold his coffee cup. Neither will discuss what they saw, but they've agreed we should leave tomorrow, cutting our trip short. Preston is missing, went to collect firewood before dusk, and hasn't returned. Search until nightfall yielded nothing. We'll resume at first light. Fleming adds a troubling postscript to this entry. Found Blackwood, sitting alone by the fire at 2 a.m., staring into the flames. Asked if he was concerned about Preston, he looked at me with an expression I cannot describe. Not fear exactly, but a kind of resigned understanding. He said, "It's been watching us since we arrived. Learning our patterns, our relationships, deciding." When I asked what he meant, he shook his head and returned to his tent. I'm writing this by lantern light, unable to sleep. The sounds from the forest are louder tonight, and if I strain my hearing, they almost resolve into words. Almost. The last entry, from October 18th, says, Preston came back at dawn. He won't say where he was. He sits and stares at the fire, not responding. His boots are covered in a reddish clay that isn't like the soil around our camp. Blackwood thinks he may have fallen and hit his head. We're breaking camp now, Conley says. And the entry ends in the middle of a sentence. The other pages had been ripped out. The main mystery in this case is what happened after Preston came back. Whatever Fleming saw in those last hours died with him, or maybe it still lives on in some way that we can't understand. The ripped pages suggest that the information is too upsetting to keep, or maybe too risky to leave for others to find. Harrison tried to find the cave that both Crawford and Fleming wrote about in their journals by using topographical maps and Martha Thornton's hazy memories of what her father had said about it. He found a possible spot near the headwaters of the current river. Harrison and 2 local guides went into the area in March 1953. They didn't come back. 3 days later, a search party found Harrison's abandoned campsite. He couldn't find his notebooks. One of the guide's jackets was found a half-mile away, torn and stained with what forensic tests later showed was printing ink, not blood. The Missouri State Highway Patrol searched a lot, but couldn't find any sign of Harrison or his friends. It was officially called a wilderness accident, and it could have been caused by a flash flood or an animal attack. The official report doesn't say that the search party also found Harrison's camera hanging from a tree branch near the camp that was left behind. When the film was developed, most of the pictures were of blurry forests, but the last 3 frames showed something strange. The first picture showed what looked like a narrow cave entrance that was partly hidden by plants. The second picture showed a rock formation inside the cave that the photographer who developed the film said looked like a door, but it was too tall and narrow for people to comfortably walk through. The third and last picture was completely black, as if it had been taken in complete darkness. The only thing that could be seen was a single long figure standing far away, which was only partially captured by the flash. The negatives were kept as proof in the case file. A fire in the Missouri State Highway Patrol's Records Department in 1958 destroyed a lot of files, including everything related to Harrison's disappearance. If the pictures ever existed outside of what witnesses said, they are now gone. If it weren't for a discovery made in 1968, the story might have ended there and been forgotten again. Dr. Elizabeth Winters, a geologist from the University of Missouri, was mapping cave systems in Shannon County when her team found a sealed chamber almost 2 meters deep in a complicated system near the current river headwaters. It looked like someone had put a wall of stacked stones around the chamber on purpose. This way of building was different from what the indigenous people in the area did, and it was also different from what early European settlers did. Winters's field notes say that the mortar that held the stones together had an unknown organic material in it that kept its ability to stick together even in the damp cave. They found signs of human activity inside the chamber, such as old lanterns, a rusted hunting knife, and pieces of leather that may have been shoes or boots. The most important thing they found was a metal box that held a stack of paper sheets that looked like they had been ripped out of a journal. Winters thought that the markings on the walls of the chamber were petroglyphs from an unknown indigenous culture at first. After looking more closely, she decided that the carvings had been done much more recently, maybe in the last 100 years. They made complicated geometric patterns that, according to Winters's notes, made an unsettling optical effect when seen by lantern light. The patterns seemed to recede into the stone itself, making it look like there was depth where there wasn't. Before Winters could properly write about these results, university officials suddenly canceled her research grant and sent her team back. Unnamed government officials took the recovered items, saying they were following rules for preserving history. Winters protested the action and was then let go from her job. In a letter to a co-worker from July 1968, she wrote, "What we found goes against everything we know about how people settled in this area. The markings on the cave walls weren't made by any known culture, and the journal pages I only saw them for a second, but they looked like they were signed R. Fleming. What worries me most is not what we found, but how hard some people are trying to keep it secret." Winters tried to get her findings published, but academic journals turned her down without looking at them. She gave up her academic career and moved to Vermont. She turned down all requests for interviews after that, until she died in 1984. After her death, Winters's personal papers were found, and they had detailed drawings of the wall markings from memory. She also wrote down some of what she remembered from the journal pages. The transcription says, "I understand now what Conley meant. It's not something watching us. It's somewhere watching us. A place that has become aware. The cave is just its entrance, not its body. Blackwood has already given in. His eyes are empty now. Preston was the first, but Blackwood followed quickly. Hartley resists, but I've seen him staring at the cave entrance when he thinks no one is watching." It goes on. Conley understands the science of it. He called it a dimensional anomaly, a thin point between here and elsewhere. I believe it is simpler than that. Some places are hungry. Some places need to be fed. The rest of the transcription gets more and more broken up, and Winters says she can't remember the exact words. She ends with a troubling observation. "The last page I saw looked like it had been written by a different person, more precise and less human. It only had a list of names on it. The 5 hunters were there, and each name was crossed out. Below them were other names, dozens of them, including Martin Crawford and others I didn't know. Some were crossed out, and others weren't. The last name on the list was Elizabeth Winters. It wasn't crossed out." Our documentary investigation must now deal with the disturbing pattern of silence that has surrounded this case since it began. Several investigations have been abruptly concluded. Records have disappeared from archives, and witnesses have either declined to testify or have gone missing. The pattern suggests that there was more than just bad luck at work. It looks like someone tried to hide what happened to those 5 hunters in October 1895. Based on what we know from surviving accounts, it seems that Blackwood, Conley, Hartley, Fleming, and Preston saw something in the Ozark wilderness that couldn't be explained in a normal way. Finding a 6th bedroll suggests that someone they don't know may have joined their group, whether they were invited or not. The cave system is a big part of many stories, which suggests that whatever happened may have happened there. The area where the hunters went missing has some strange features that could help us figure out what happened to them. The current river headwaters come from a complicated system of underground aquifers that hasn't been fully mapped yet. Hydrological surveys done in the 1,950 seconds showed that some water sources in the area have mineral compositions that are different from any others in the area. These sources have higher levels of rare earth elements and trace compounds that are usually only found in deep geological formations. There have been reports of magnetic anomalies in the area since the early 1900s. Within a few hundred yards, compass readings can be off by as much as 45 degrees. Some researchers have compared the interference patterns that modern equipment experiences to electromagnetic pulses. Local legends say that these things are caused by deposits of iron ore or other minerals, but geological surveys have not found any proof of these stories. Folklore from the area gives us more, though not always reliable, points of view. People in Shannon County have been telling stories about the Ozark Hollows for a long time. These are some of the most remote valleys where, according to legend, the line between our world and another world gets thin. Magnetic anomalies, strange sounds, and a confusing quality that makes people lose their way even when they are in familiar places are common in these areas. The Missouri Historical Society put together a collection of oral histories in the 1,930 seconds. These histories include stories from people of all ages who lived in the Ozarks about places where the woods go quiet and time slows down. Several stories talk about travelers who came back from these places with no memory of what happened to them, or who came back changed in small but unsettling ways. One thing that happens over and over in these stories is that people go into certain caves and see someone who looks like them standing right in front of them, always leading them deeper in. A trapper named Jeremiah Hollister told the Winona sheriff in 1922 that he had found an old campsite deep in the woods that had 5 sets of clothes neatly folded and boots next to them, as if the owners had just taken them off and walked away. The place he talked about was about the same as where the hunting party went missing in 1895. When officials asked Hollister to show them the way, he refused, saying, "Some places don't want to be found twice." He left the area soon after. County records show that Hollister moved to Idaho, where he lived alone until he died in 1946. As part of the probate process, his personal items were listed. Among them was a small leather pouch with 5 pocket watch fobs, each with the initials of one of the missing hunters. The fobs were sent to the Shannon County Historical Society, but the package never got there. Postal records show that it was sent to the courthouse, but there is no record of it being received. The few newspaper articles from 1895 that are still around talk about something else that most later investigations missed. In the weeks leading up to the hunter's disappearance, people living near the current river headwaters reported strange things happening in the sky, like lights that couldn't be explained, sudden drops in temperature, and a constant low-frequency hum that made animals nervous. There were also reports like this in 1953, when Harrison went missing, and again in 1968, when Winter's investigation was cut short. From 1890 to 1901, the station master at Winona kept a meteorological journal that recorded strange weather patterns in the weeks before the hunters went missing. He writes, October 1895. The second night in a row of ground fog that moves against the wind. The fog seems to come from the eastern hills instead of rising from the valleys, which is what usually happens. October 6th, 1895. Barometric pressure changes that have never been seen before. Pressure drops and rises several times in a matter of hours without any changes in the weather. October 10th, 1895. Farmers report strange behavior from their animals. Livestock refusing to graze in certain areas, and wild game migrating out of season. A hydrological survey of the current river basin in 1962 found a big problem under the spot where the hunters were last seen. Researchers used early ground-penetrating radar to find what looked like a huge chamber almost 300 feet below the surface. This chamber was much bigger than any known cave in the area. The survey report says that the chamber seems to have a large amount of water or another liquid in it that reflects light in a strange way. They didn't get any money to look into it more. Dr. Kenneth Morrow, the lead researcher, appealed the decision by writing to the Department of Interior. The acoustic properties of this subterranean chamber are unlike anything previously documented in karst topography. Sound waves directed into the chamber return with altered frequency pattern, suggesting either unusual geometric features or properties of the enclosed medium that modify sound transmission. This phenomenon warrants thorough scientific investigation. His appeal was denied. Until he retired in 1967, Morrow's research proposals were always turned down. In an oral history recorded just before his death in 1976, Morrow said that a government official had come to see him shortly after he made his discovery and told him to find another research interest if he wanted to keep his job. In 1965, a retired forester named Raymond Parker came forward with a strange story that made the mystery even deeper. Parker said that in October 1895, when he was a young lumber surveyor, he had been camping about 15 miles from where the hunting party went missing. He said that a sound like 1,000 voices whispering together in the forest clearing in front of him woke him up before dawn. Parker said he saw 5 men walking in a line. They moved like people who were sleepwalking, he told the Shannon County Historical Society. They were following someone or something I couldn't quite see. Just a darkness darker than the night around it. Their eyes were open but empty. Some people might think Parker's story is just the confused memory of an old man or an attempt to get involved in a well-known local mystery. County records do show that Parker was working in the area in 1895. and the way he described the 5 men matched the missing hunters in ways that he could not have known unless he had really seen them. Parker added something that had never been mentioned in any public account of the case. He said that the 5 men were not just walking in a line, but were connected to each other and to whatever was leading them by what he called threads of light, too thin to be ropes, that stretched from their eyes to the figure in front of them. This description doesn't match any known optical phenomenon, but it is very similar to the dimensional filaments that Dr. James Conley theorized in his unpublished research. What happened to James Conley, Thomas Blackwood, William Hartley, Robert Fleming, and Charles Preston? The official record doesn't say anything. They never found their bodies. There has never been a clear answer for why they went missing. Their families waited in vain for answers that never came. In the end, death certificates were given out that said the cause of death was presumed accidental death in wilderness. But the pattern of hidden evidence stopped investigations, and missing witnesses suggests a more troubling possibility that what happened to those 5 men in October 1895 was so strange that those who knew the truth chose to stay quiet instead of telling it. There are many secrets in the Ozark Mountains. In deep forests, there are old homesteads that people lived and died in alone for generations. There are many cave systems that go for miles under the ground, and many of them are still not mapped. For months at a time, remote hollows don't get any sunlight. In these locations, it may be feasible for entities to exist beyond our conventional understanding of reality, not supernatural, but natural, in a manner that remains incomprehensible to us. Think about the strange sounds that no animal or person made, the feeling of being watched by several members of the hunting party, the footprints that didn't match any known species, the 6th bedroll when there should have been 5, the cave that didn't show up on any maps, and the men who left their camp without taking anything with them, as if they were going from one reality to another. A geological survey team reported strange magnetic readings in the area where the hunters went missing in 1957. The needles on compasses would spin in strange ways, and electronic devices would stop working. The local topography creates a natural amphitheater that might amplify certain low-frequency sounds below normal human hearing threshold, potentially affecting cognitive function. The team leader said in his report, the report was classified and stayed that way until a Freedom of Information request found it in 1966. The report had a technical appendix that was heavily edited in the version that was made public. The few visible parts talk about standing wave patterns and infrasonic resonance, which could theoretically change how people perceive things. One unredacted paragraph says that some geometric features of the local cave systems, along with the mineral makeup of the rock around them, might make sounds that can change neural activity when heard for long periods of time. The report says that these effects would be strongest during certain weather conditions that happen every year, like those that happened in October 1895. A 1959 memo from the Department of the Interior calls the area Zone 47 amperes and says it is off-limits for ongoing observational studies. There is no explanation of what was being seen or by whom. Until 1964, public access to several thousand acres around the hunters' last known location was limited, supposedly for the purpose of managing the forest. The land had changed a lot by the time it was open to the public again. New hiking trails went around the area where the hunters' camp had been. Concrete plugs that looked like natural rockfalls had been used to seal off cave entrances in the area. A ranger station was built nearby and is staffed all year round, even though it is in a remote area with few visitors. In her last interview before she died in 1957, Martha Thornton added one last disturbing detail to the story. Martha says that her father took something else from the abandoned campsite and kept it secret until he died: William Hartley's pocket watch. The watch had stopped at 3:17, which probably meant that the hunting party had left their camp. But what worried Thornton was how the watch was doing. Martha remembered that the glass was clouded, as if it had been exposed to intense heat, and the metal was warped in a way he couldn't explain. He said it looked like the watch had aged 100 years in a single moment. What Martha's father found inside the watch case was even more disturbing. Like a lot of men back then, Hartley kept a small picture of his family in his pocket watch. Thornton opened the case and saw that the picture was still there, but the faces of Hartley's wife and kids had been carefully cut out, as if by a surgeon. This detail matches something Sheriff Crawford wrote in his journal, which we didn't mention before. On the 26th of October, 1895, he wrote, "I looked through the personal items found at the campsite. Each hunter had brought pictures of loved ones, as men often do when they travel. In every picture, the faces have been cut out with a blade, not torn or burned. The cuts are the same in all pictures, which means they were changed at the same time by the same person. But who would do this, and why?" Gerald Matt, an amateur historian, tried to find the descendants of the missing hunters in 1963. He found out that the Blackwood, Conley, Hartley, Fleming, and Preston family lines had all gone through strange changes in the years after the disappearance. The rates of infant death were much higher than the regional average. Mental illness happened with disturbing frequency, and most strikingly, male descendants often had the same dream of walking through endless cave passages after a figure they could never quite see. Matt wrote a short book called Echoes Through Generations, The Lingering Impact of the Shannon County Disappearances, to share what he had learned. At the time, the publication didn't get much attention, but now it is a popular item for collectors of Ozark folklore. Matt writes in the monograph, "Whatever happened to these men in 1895 cast a shadow that extends through time, affecting those who share their bloodlines. It suggests a continuity of experience that transcends conventional understanding of how trauma propagates through generations." The last piece of this broken puzzle came together in 1968, which was also the year that Dr. Winter's cave exploration came to an end. Albert Jenkins, a resident of a nursing home in Springfield, said he was James Conley's nephew and gave a deposition to a local lawyer. Jenkins, who was 83 and not in good health at the time, said that his uncle had not gone missing in 1895, as was officially reported. Jenkins says that Conley came back to Springfield 3 weeks after the hunting party went missing, but he was different when he got back. In his deposition, Jenkins said, "He wasn't the same man. He looked like my uncle and spoke like him, but something was off. His movements were wrong. They were too precise and mechanical. His eyes, there was nothing behind them." Jenkins said that Conley lived in his sister's home for almost 6 months. He wouldn't see any visitors and wouldn't practice medicine. The family could hear him pacing and talking in a language they didn't know at night. Jenkins says that Conley wrote in journals for hours, filling thousands of pages with words and drawings that his family couldn't understand. He vanished again on the 23rd of April 1896, this time for good. Jenkins said that the day before he left, he told his mother, "They're still walking, all of them. I have to join them again. The journey isn't finished." When she asked where they were going, he smiled in a way that scared her. "To meet what waits at the center. It's patient. It's always been patient, but now it's awake." The journals were supposedly kept by the family until a house fire in 1917 destroyed all but a few pages. Jenkins gave these pieces that were still around to the lawyer, but they disappeared from the law firm's files before they could be looked at properly. 2 weeks after giving his deposition, Jenkins died. There is no proof in county records that James Conley ever went back to Springfield after the hunting party went missing. It was normal at the time for missing people to not get a death certificate until 7 years after the event. But the 1900 census has a strange entry. A James Conley, a doctor, is listed as living at the same address as Conley's sister. It looks like the entry was added after the census was finished, and it was written in a different way. A Springfield city directory from 1896 also lists James Conley as living at his sister's address, with the note, "Hours by appointment only." No patients from this time ever came forward to say they had seen Conley after he was supposed to have disappeared. In 1900, local newspapers asked his sister about the census mistake, and she said that her brother had not come back. She said it was a cruel clerical error that had given her false hope. But postal records show that someone at that address got professional medical journals addressed to Dr. James Conley all year long in 1896. A delivery log from a nearby pharmacy shows that unusual chemical compounds were regularly delivered to the house during the same time. The last delivery, which was on the 22nd of April 1896, one day before Conley supposedly went missing again, included chemicals that are usually used in developing photos. However, Conley had no known interest in photography before he went missing. What should we think about these pieces of evidence that are spread out and often don't agree with each other? The official story that 5 hunters just got lost in the woods and died from exposure or an accident doesn't explain why there are no remains, why the equipment was left behind, or why there were so many witness reports of strange things happening before and after they disappeared. What options do we have left if we ignore the usual ones? Some scientists think that the current river cave system might have pockets of naturally occurring gases that could make people see things that aren't there or change their state of mind. Some people say that the area's strange geological features could create electromagnetic fields that could change how the brain works. These scientific theories are possible, but they don't explain the pattern of investigations that have been stopped and evidence that has gone missing that has been present in this case from the start. In 1954, Dr. Harold Linden, a geochemist, published a paper in a little-known scientific journal. He said that certain rare combinations of minerals under certain temperature and pressure conditions could create what he called perceptual altering fields. He thought that these fields might explain reports of time, distortion and spatial disorientation by cave explorers throughout history. At the time, the paper didn't get much attention, but Linden got a grant from an unnamed government agency to continue his research. Linden never published any of his findings, and after 1958, he refused all interviews. He suddenly left his academic career to become a reclusive organic farmer in New Mexico. Dr. Margaret Chen, a co-worker from this time, later said that Linden had done field research in the Ozarks right before he left academia. In a 1972 interview with a fringe scientific magazine, Chen said, "Harold came back from Missouri completely changed. He burned his research notes and destroyed lab samples he'd collected. He would only say that some knowledge isn't meant for us and that certain doorways should stay closed. He seemed really scared of what he found." The idea that what happened to those 5 hunters in 1895 wasn't an isolated event is probably the most disturbing. The reappearance of similar occurrences in 1953 and 1968, alongside renewed inquiries, indicates a persistent anomaly rather than an isolated incident. If Parker's story is true, the men didn't die in the usual way. Instead, they were taken away by something that has been in those woods for decades, and they were aware of it but couldn't control their actions. Local newspaper archives show other possible links. 3 loggers went missing from a camp near Eminence in 1901. They left behind their tools and personal items. A geologist from Washington University went missing in 1923 while doing research in the area. His campsite was found intact, with meals still set out on plates as if he had left them in the middle of a meal. People said that 2 hunters from Kansas City went missing in 1944. Their truck was found parked at a trailhead, and their camping gear was still inside. There was never any sign of any of these people. There is a pattern in these events. People who went into certain parts of the Shannon County wilderness and never came back. They left behind neat campsites with no signs of struggle or hasty departure. In every case, the first intensive searches did not find anything. In each instance, official inquiries ended with peculiar suddenness, and in every case, participants in the searches reported encountering inexplicable occurrences, disorientation, temporal anomalies, anomalous auditory experiences, and a continual sensation of surveillance. There have been a lot of changes in the Ozark Mountains since 1895. Tourism has made once isolated places more accessible by building paved roads and hiking trails. Visitors can now explore mapped and developed cave systems. Park rangers protect and patrol the current river, which is now part of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways. Still, there are parts of the deep backcountry that don't get many visitors, places where cell phones lose signal, GPS devices show impossible locations, and experienced hikers say they always feel like they're being watched. Requests made under the Freedom of Information Act for Park Service records show an unusual pattern of restricted areas in the Ozark National Scenic Riverways. Some places on internal maps are marked as unsuitable for recreation or environmentally sensitive, even though they don't have any obvious ecological features that need special protection. These zones are roughly the same as places where people have gone missing in the past, like the area where the 1,895 hunting party was last seen. There are many mentions in park ranger logs, from 1,972 to 1,998, of keeping up the Site 47 amperes perimeters and following standard observational protocols. The budget includes money for specialized 47 monitoring equipment that was put in place throughout the restricted areas. The purpose of this equipment is never made clear, nor is the type of thing that was being watched. David Hollister, a backcountry ranger in 2007, filed an unusual incident report. He was not related to the trapper, from 1,922. Hollister found what he called a perfect circle of dead vegetation, about 20 feet in diameter, while patrolling a remote part of the park near where the hunters were last seen. There was a hole in the ground in the middle of the circle that looked like the entrance to a cave that had fallen in. As Hollister got closer to the site, his radio made a noise that sounded like thousands of people whispering at once. At exactly 3:17 p.m., his watch stopped. Hollister told Ranger headquarters where he was, and then went back. The next day, a team went to look into it, but they couldn't find any sign of the vegetation circle or the cave entrance that had fallen in, even though they had GPS coordinates. Hollister said he could take them back to the exact spot, but when they got there, nothing was out of the ordinary. They said the incident was caused by disorientation and moved on. Hollister asked to move to a different park. Not long after that, Hollister wrote in his personal journal, which was published after his death in a car accident in 2009, "I know what I saw. I know what I heard," he went on to say. "The voices were speaking words, but not in any language I recognized. And as I stood at the edge of that circle, I felt a pull, not physical, but mental, a compulsion to step forward, to descend into that depression. Had my radio not crackled at that moment, breaking my concentration, I believe I would have done so, and I believe I would not have returned." The journal entry continues. "The strangest part came that night. I dreamed of 5 men I've never met walking single file into a cave mouth. They turned to look at me as they entered, their eyes empty, their movements synchronized. The last man in line raised his hand, beckoning me to follow. When I woke, I found myself standing in my living room, fully dressed, with my hiking boots on. The front door was wide open. As recently as 2014, hikers in the area have reported strange things happening, like time going by without explanation, feeling lost for a short time, and the feeling of being followed by someone who wasn't there. Most of these reports come from the area where the 1,895 hunting party was last seen, but not many of the people who reported these experiences know about that historical connection. In 2012, a group of geology students from the University of Missouri did research in the restricted area without permission. They used ground-penetrating radar to find what looked like a large cave system that wasn't on any official maps. Before they could finish their survey, their equipment broke down, and university officials took their incomplete data when they got back to campus. Later, one student posted online without giving their name, "What we found doesn't make sense. The cave structure we found doesn't match normal karst formation patterns. It's too geometric and regular. It looks almost designed, but it's hundreds of feet underground in solid bedrock, and the internal spaces created interference patterns with our equipment that our professors can't explain." What is most disturbing about this case is not what we know, but what has been systematically taken out of the record. The missing journal pages, the evidence that has gone missing, the investigations that have stopped, and the witnesses who stop talking or disappear. This pattern points to more than just an unsolved mystery. It points to a mystery that someone or something doesn't want to be solved. William Gannett, a historian, tried to write a full account of the disappearances of 1,895 for the Missouri Historical Review in 1957. They turned down his manuscript without giving a reason. Gannett wrote to his co-workers and said he was confused about why he couldn't get to some public records that should have been easy to find. He wrote, The gaps make a pattern that you can only see when you know what's missing. Ganay eventually gave up on the project after two men came to see him and said they were from the State Historical Society. But they didn't show any ID, and the society later said they hadn't sent anyone. Ganay says that the men told him that his research dealt with continuing sensitivity and told him to move on to other historical topics. He wrote, "It's as if someone went through the archives before me and carefully took out certain documents while leaving the rest of the material alone." The 5 hunters who went missing in the Ozark Mountains in 1895 left behind families who were sad, a community that looked for them, and questions that have never been fully answered. Their disappearance made people think about things they would rather not think about. That our understanding of reality is still incomplete. That there is more to the wilderness than trees, rocks, and animals, and that some lines can't be crossed again. Sheriff Crawford's journal entry before he quit his job may be the most honest assessment. Some truths should stay buried. Not because we can't understand them, but because understanding would change us in ways we could never go back to. In 1965, Martha Thornton, who was in her last years, told an interviewer, "My father never went back to those woods, never hunted again, never spoke of what he found there, except to say that some places in this world aren't meant for us. Not because we're unwelcome, but because we're unprepared for what awaits us there." Since then, the area has become even more mysterious. Many researchers who have tried to look into the case have had strange things happen to them. Dr. Catherine Reynolds, a folklorist who did field work in Shannon County in 1979, said that recordings of her interviews with locals about the 1,895 incident would play back with gaps that couldn't be explained, or they would be replaced by what she called a soft humming sound that might have been words in a language she couldn't understand. Reynolds stopped her research after what she called missing time. She was driving on a rural road near the restricted area when she suddenly found herself 30 miles away with no memory of the 3 hours that had passed. People who live in the Ozarks have come up with their own ways to get around the deeper parts of the wilderness. In 1992, the folklore department at the University of Arkansas interviewed families who had lived in Shannon County for a long time. They found that these families acted in the same way over and over again. They stay away from some places altogether, especially at dawn and dusk. Before going into remote areas, they leave small gifts like coins, tobacco, or handmade items at the trailheads. They never go into the backcountry by themselves, and maybe the most important thing is that they teach their kids not to follow anyone or anything they didn't go into the woods with, no matter how familiar they seem. The 5 men who went into the Ozark wilderness in October 1895 were Thomas Blackwood, James Conley, William Hartley, Robert Fleming, and Charles Preston. The bodies were never found. We still don't know what happened to them. But that fall, something happened in those mountains that other people have seen over the years. It still casts a long shadow over the deep hollows and ancient caves of that wilderness that seems so peaceful. If you go into the Ozark backcountry today, the official advice is to stay on marked trails, keep in touch with other people, and get back to civilization before nightfall. People in the area might add another warning that has been passed down through the years. If you hear whispers when no one is around, if you feel like someone is watching you when you're alone, or if you feel drawn to unmarked caves or standing stones, turn back. There are some paths that you shouldn't take. It costs too much to learn some things. In 2015, a park ranger who wanted to remain anonymous said, "There are places in these hills where the silence has a quality to it. Not peaceful, but expectant, like something is listening to you." The old-timers call them thin places, where the border between here and somewhere else isn't quite solid. Most people feel uncomfortable and leave quickly. Some feel drawn to that silence. Those are the ones we sometimes don't see again. Maybe the 5 hunters from Springfield learned this truth too late, or maybe they chose to follow something into the dark that promised knowledge beyond what most people can understand. We might never find out. The forests keep their secrets. The caves stay quiet. And 5 men keep going on their journey in the deep woods of the Ozarks, following a figure they can never quite see through passages that lead ever downward into darkness beyond our understanding. In 1971, an entry from William Hartley's journal, a banker, was found in the archives of the Springfield Historical Society, where it had been misfiled with tax records. The date on the single page, which looks like it was ripped out of a personal diary, is the 11th of October, 1895, the day before the hunting party left. It says, "Conley thinks he has found the source of the phenomena he has been studying. He says the indigenous people avoided certain valleys for reasons their descendants can no longer explain." Blackwood is doubtful, but interested enough to plan this trip under the guise of a hunting trip. Preston and Fleming don't know our true purpose, and neither does my dear Helen. It's better that they don't know. If Conley is right, we are on the verge of a discovery that will change how we think about natural law. If he is wrong, we lose nothing but a few days in the woods. Either way, I have left this record and my affairs in order. Some instinct tells me we are going where few have gone before and from which fewer have returned. There is only one document left from the original investigation in the Shannon County Courthouse archives. It is a faded telegram that Sheriff Crawford sent to the Springfield authorities on the 30th of October, 1895. It says, "Search concluded. No evidence found. Case closed." Below this official text, which is hard to read and looks like it was added quickly, are the words, "They went willingly." God help us all. One last thing to note. In 1998, while workers were fixing up the old bank building in Springfield that used to belong to William Hartley, they found a sealed metal box inside a wall cavity. There were 5 identical pocket watches in the box, all of which were stopped at 317. The initials of one of the missing hunters were on each watch. The construction foreman said that the watches looked brand new, with no signs of age or wear, even though they had probably been hidden for more than 100 years. It is said that the watches went missing from the secure room where they were being kept before authorities could look at them. There is no official record of their discovery. The construction workers who found them didn't want to talk about it anymore, and the renovation project went on without any more problems. It's still not clear if this story is true, a myth, or a lie. This is a fitting end to a mystery that has been impossible to solve for more than 100 years.